I had been asked, how did I feel being the first black? And then another person said, aren't you proud to be the first black anchorman? And I said, of course not. Why would I be proud to be the first black anchorman? Why would I be proud of a situation that wasn't good? You know, there's no pride in that. I feel burdened, if you really want to know. I am proud to be a network anchorman.
Burdened?
Yeah.
Why do you say burdened?
Because whenever you are the first, you have to take all of the problems of breaking down the barriers, of getting people to understand certain things that they couldn't have understood because you are the first.
Max Robinson was born on May 1st, 1939, in Richmond, Virginia, to his mother, Doris Robinson, and his father, Maxie Robinson. He grew up during the heart of segregation and would often see black people mistreated due to racial injustice. After graduating from Armstrong High School, he would go on to attend Virginia Commonwealth University, and after completing college, he enlisted in the United States Air Force, but he was ultimately medically discharged. And after his time in the service, Max would get into radio at WSSV AM in Petersburg, Virginia. He was an on-air personality known as Max the Player. And although being a radio personality was fun, this was during a time that the popularity of television was on the rise, and Max knew that he wanted to be live on TV. And in 1959, he would get his opportunity because a station named WTOV-TV in Portsmouth, Virginia was having auditions for an on-air personality for their news segment. But when Max arrived to audition, it was a sign on the door that said this job is for white people only and that a black person shouldn't even apply. Max looked at the sign and walked past it like it wasn't even there and went into the audition. And to his surprise, they let him audition. And to further that surprise, they actually gave him the job.
Even though it's clearly indicated, you can't. You must try and find out for yourself whether you can. So I went to the station, and there must have been 25, 30, 40 white boys there. And I walk in, and everybody turns and looks at me like, what the hell is he doing here? You know. And I muscled up that, inner courage and tried not to show any nervousness and stood proudly, And I'm called in and I'm auditioned. I was treated kindly. And the guy calls off 5 finalists. And I'm one of them, right? You want to see some dirty stares going out the door? And you want to see a guy smiling back going, good to see you. And I was one of 2 who was picked to work at the station.
But he wouldn't last there too long because even though he was doing an excellent job reporting the news, when he was on air, there would be a station logo blocking out his face, so you couldn't see that it was a black man doing the reporting. And one day, Max got tired of this, and he told the producers of the show to remove the slide because he wanted his family members to be able to see him on TV. And it caused an uproar. The owner of the station said he got numerous calls from upset white people about seeing a black man on their TV screen. And the next day, Max Robinson was fired. But this wouldn't deter him on his journey to becoming the first black news anchor. He would move to Washington, D.C., where he began to work at WTOP-TV as a cameraman, and he would help out around set. But one day they were having issues with the microphones, and they asked Max to stand in and act as the news anchor to test the new mics. And as the producers sat back and watched, they seen his grace and the poise in his delivery, and they knew that he had potential, and they would make him a full-time reporter for the station. And although he was able to move up, he still faced racial inequality, and he was forced to accept less money than his white counterparts who were doing the same job. But after only a year there, he would move over to WRC-TV, where Max's star would begin to rise, He won 6 journalism awards in 3 years, along with 2 regional Emmys, one for a documentary that he did called The Other Washington, about growing up poor, black, and disenfranchised in Washington, D.C. He would also receive praise for his coverage of the 1968 riots following the assassination of civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King, along with his coverage of the anti-war protests against the war in Vietnam that were taking place across the country. But after realizing that he wouldn't get the opportunity to become an anchor at his current company, he went back to WTOP-TV, where they did make him the first black news anchor in Washington, D.C., and he would become an important part of the community. It's said that anything that Max could do to help, he would be there. If a church needed a special speaker, Max would show up. If a family fell on hard times, needed rent money, they could find a way to get in touch with Max and he would help. An incarcerated father with a son going down the wrong path, Max could step in and talk to him. Anything that he could do to help his people, Max would try. But his flaws as a man would begin to show. He had a long time struggle with alcoholism, and in 1973, when his dad passed away, he was so sad and emotional that he got extremely intoxicated. He took his gun and went to the balcony of his apartment and started letting off shots. The police would be called and Max would be arrested. He would apologize the next day on air, but all would be forgiven. The district loved Max, and he had respect. And that respect would be on full display in 1977 during the Hanafi Siege, when a man by the name of Hamas Abdul Khalis and 12 of his followers took over 3 buildings in Washington, D.C. The leader of the Hanafi movement said that he was doing it to bring attention to the 1973 murders of his entire family, allegedly by the hands of the Philadelphia Black Mafia. They had 150 hostages and 2 people were killed. And during the 39-hour standoff, the Hanafi movement refused to talk to law enforcement. They would only talk to one person, and that was Max Robinson.
You are asking that those responsible for the deaths or who killed your children be brought to the B'nai B'rith building.
And the ones that killed Malcolm.
Anchorman Max Robinson talking to this man, Hamas Abdul Khalis.
Eventually, he convinced the gunmen to surrender and release the hostages. 2 people lost their lives and 3 people were injured. One of those people being a councilman by the name of Marion Barry, who had a bullet lodged above his heart, but he was able to survive and go on to become the mayor of Washington, D.C. The Hanafi Siege was highly publicized and broadcast on news channels across the world, with millions of people watching. One of those people watching was an ABC executive by the name of Roone Arledge. He saw the way that Max handled the situation and he was impressed, and he wanted him to be a part of his newest idea, a 3-man news team. 1 man across the pond in London, 1 man in Washington, D.C., and 1 man in Chicago. Along with Peter Jennings and Frank Reynolds, Max Robinson would complete the team, making him the first black news anchor on a national level.
Program to improve security in large public housing projects where the crime rate is particularly high. Max?
Across the country, Frank, the city of Cleveland, which has received a $1 million federal grant to beef up police presence in Cleveland's public housing projects, has run into a problem.
Max was now a star news anchor, and although he was disappointed that he didn't get placed in Washington, D.C., and he would have to broadcast from Chicago, Max would still make the most of his opportunity. He knew that he wasn't just a role model for young black journalists, he was a representation of black people in general. And every time that he would show up on screen, he wanted to exude an aura of being regal, intelligent, confident, all the way to the point of perfection. Max would become one of the founders of the National Association of Black Journalists, and he would act as a mentor to many. He was often praised and given accolades for everything that he had accomplished in his broadcasting career and all that he had done for the advancement of black people. But Max didn't like to be praised for anything that he had done to help black people. He felt like he was doing what any black man would do, and that he shouldn't be put up on a pedestal for it. And the reason that he may have felt this way is because Max always had issues with his self-esteem and his confidence. He was once quoted as saying, "I think one of my basic flaws has been lack of esteem, always feeling like I had to do more. I could never do enough or be good enough, and that was a real problem." But despite the lack of internal confidence, from the outside looking in, Max was on top of the world. He had a $200,000 a year contract with ABC. He would show up to work in sports cars, dressed to impress, and he was a very popular news anchor on a national level. But he began to run into issues at ABC due to the portrayal of black people. He didn't like it and he wanted change. He wanted more positive images to be shown. And this would cause clashes between Max and the ABC executives, and it didn't help in 1981 when he did a speech at Smith College calling out racism in America and calling out racism at the ABC network, and this really fractured their relationship. They demoted Max from being a news anchor and began to push Peter Jennings more and more to the forefront, and this, along with the constant clashes about racism, it started to get to Max, and sometimes it would be caught while the cameras were rolling.
Do it. I had no choice. I didn't have any...
Then I dare you to do that shit. How the hell do you let that man in Washington update my fucking story? There's no fucking excuse for it, goddammit. No, tell me there's one for it. I'm working my ass off. Now let's get something done out of you.
I had a monitor of a picture sitting there of the doctor.
I don't give a...
It's said, out of protest and frustration, Max started to show up to work late, or not at all, and if he did show up, he would drink excessively. One of the assignments that Max was given during his demotion was covering a wildfire in Los Angeles, but when he showed up, he was wearing a fur coat, and this angered ABC executives even further. Then in 1983, after the death of his co-anchor Frank Reynolds, Max failed to show up to the funeral, even though he was scheduled to sit next to First Lady Nancy Reagan. And that was the final straw at ABC. Max would leave the ABC network, but he would bounce right back, becoming the first black news anchor at WMAQ-TV in Chicago, and it's said that he was making almost double the salary. But despite the promising start, Max wouldn't be there for too long. He had constant clashes with producers, and he accused his colleagues of racism. He also said that local Chicago reporters were trying to pry into his personal life to make him look bad in the media, exposing his excessive drinking and his marital issues, and eventually Max would leave the station in 1985. Max would do a few jobs as a freelance journalist, but outside of that, he would never work in a professional setting again, only in his mid-40s and already retired. And in 1986, his third marriage to Beverly Hamilton would end in divorce. Max would spend the next few years in and out of treatment centers, trying to fight against his alcohol abuse and his depression. And as he was making strides to overcome both of those things, he was hit with a bout of pneumonia. He checked himself in to Blue Island Hospital in Illinois, and after the doctors ran tests, it was discovered that he had acquired immune deficiency syndrome, also known as AIDS. Max said that he contracted the disease through numerous relationships with different women and living a reckless lifestyle. But it didn't come from a relationship with a man or intravenous drug use. He would live in seclusion over the next few years, rarely making any public appearances due to his deteriorating health. although he would often receive visits from old colleagues and friends coming to wish him well. But they said Max didn't want pity for himself or anybody to feel sorry for him. He would often just want to hear about the great things that they had going on in their lives. And according to his son, Mark Robinson, who helped take care of him after he fell ill, he said it was very difficult watching after his dad because he was used to seeing him as this tall, strong man, almost like a superhero, and to now see him barely able to move, slowly fading away, it was just devastating. When Max was first diagnosed with the AIDS virus, people that were close to him felt like he should speak out and become a spokesperson and to raise awareness about how deadly it really is, but Max just wasn't ready to take on that responsibility. But as his health continued to decline, he would have a change of heart and open up to the world about his battle with the deadly virus. He was receiving treatment in Chicago, but none of the medications were working. He decided to take a trip against the advice of his family because they didn't think that he was strong enough to make it, but he wanted to see the place that he loved one more time, Washington, D.C. In the fall of 1988, Max Robinson was a speaker at Howard University's School of Communications, where he gave a very passionate and powerful speech for a man facing such grim circumstances.
I'm not recommending that you be old hard-headed like I was and stubborn. And I never recommended my way. I did the best I could. But try to keep your integrity. Because you're going to find out in life, at the end, it's all you got.
And not too long after delivering this speech, Max would check himself into the Howard University Hospital. And on December 20th, 1988, Max Robinson would pass away due to complications from AIDS. He was once quoted as saying one of his favorite childhood memories was using a whites-only water fountain in an act of defiance. That was just the type of spirit that he had, and that spirit would pave the way for generations of young black journalists that came after him. During his lifetime, Max was often reluctant to accept any kind of praise or accolades for what he had done for black people in America. But Max was wrong about that because his legacy does deserve to be uplifted, and what he did for black people should never be forgotten. And Max Robinson, he was only 49 years old when he died. Rest in peace, King.